Hello students in Paul as Local Theologian. This is the Monday morning response video, or Monday afternoon, I guess at this point, response video for week 2 in our course together. You can expect me, as I said to many of you in the one-on-ones, you can expect that I'll give a short responsive video lecture each week on Monday at some point that sort of sets the tone and responds to some of what I've seen in the discussion boards or maybe even things that I've heard from you via email. So I wanted to start, first of all, by thanking you for your wonderful questions. The 3 questions discussion forum for week 1. We'll do this basically every other week, every odd week in the course. We will have this opportunity to formulate 3 questions and share them with the class, and share them with me, really. And I wanted to clarify, you are welcome to respond to one another's questions. You're not obligated to do so. Of course, I enjoyed the ways in which I saw some engagement on the discussion forum, but you certainly are not expected to do that. This is one way for you to be checking in with me and other students in the class about things that are still unclear or that you would like to know more information about. And so I will try to respond to a number of those questions. Let me say, just as a sort of broad idea as it relates to these questions, I think as you get into the practice of formulating these questions, it's really important for you to start thinking about what sort of questions you are asking and how you might go about asking these questions. So, for example, this week I saw questions that might be answered by consulting the Bible, or maybe consulting a commentary or another book on Paul. But I think were more explicitly hermeneutical or theological questions that have to do with the authority of Paul's letters, or, for example, the place of the so-called undisputed letters in the New Testament canon and in contemporary communities of faith. So I think one of the exercises, in addition to simply formulating these questions and beginning to show that interaction and engagement with the learning resources, the second is for you to be thinking to yourself, what sorts of questions am I asking? Because I think that's an important thing for us to be aware of as we continue our journey together. I want to respond to a couple of the threads that I saw in the 3 questions exercise. Of course, I can't answer them all, and if I don't engage or answer one of your questions, it doesn't mean that it was unimportant or unsuccessful. It just means I can't have this video lecture be 14 hours long. So I've got to consolidate. And so I wanted to respond to just a couple of things. The first is sort of a word of introduction about the disputed and undisputed letters question. The textbook by Kim treats this as largely a concluded question, everybody agrees sort of thing. And in large part, that's true. The majority of New Testament critical scholars regard this idea of there being 7 undisputed letters of Paul and 6 disputed letters of Paul. They regard that as a pretty much a scholarly dogma. There are very few voices that challenge it. And the only thing that I would say is I want us to recognize first that this is a scholarly construction. There's no archaeological evidence, there's no textual evidence that supports this. It's a theory that has emerged in the process of close reading and some historical investigation. But it is nevertheless a scholarly construction, and that I think is important for us to keep in mind. It was originally was first introduced by Schleiermacher in the 1800s, who doubted the authenticity of 1 Peter, and with 1 Peter there sort of evolved a sort of a questioning of all of the pastoral epistles, 1 Timothy, 2 Timothy, and Titus, and eventually a re-evaluation of Ephesians and Colossians and 2 Thessalonians. The criteria that are used to determine this are things like grammar and writing style, but mostly theological differences, theological particularities of the letters, and if we can align these letters with what we think or what we know about Paul's biography. And I just want to highlight that this is an area where there is a tremendous amount of scholarly effort. It's not malevolent scholarly inquiry or scholarly effort, but it is scholarly effort. And so, for our purposes, what matters is that you understand this distinction and that you have some awareness of why people think this about the pastoral epistles or the other disputed letters of Paul. Our class will focus mostly on the undisputed letters of Paul later in the course, but that's not because they're undisputed. It's simply because the letters I've selected, I think, offer us the most important or most significant conversations around Paul and local theology. A second thing that I wanted to point out that I think Laverne brought up in her questions has to do with the consistency of Pauline theology and the degree to which Paul might have modified his view as he grew up. And I think that this actually gets to the heart of one of the major questions about Pauline theology, and that is the identification of what is the quote-unquote core of Pauline theology. Kim talks about that Paul had a consistent, understanding of the good news, or a consistent theology. And I want to present that as an open question for us, actually. I want us to wonder, and I want us to wrestle with the degree to which there is a sort of a core Pauline theology that we can extract from the very responsive and particular letters that we have found in our New Testament. The third thing I want to talk about is the question of citizenship, and this is a debated issue. Paul's citizenship is upheld in the book of Acts. We learn in Acts that Paul is a citizen. It's one of the things that disturbs his captors and his abusers because he should be getting different kind of treatment because he's a Roman citizen. However, in Paul's letters, there is no mention of his citizenship. There's no mention that he is a citizen of Rome. And where we might expect it, Philippians 3, it's not mentioned at all there. But of course, all of the things that he lists about his identity in Philippians 3 are of a Jewish nature. And so it's an open question, and it ultimately has to do with the broader, kind of more complicated question of how we understand the relationship between Acts and Paul's letters. There are definitely areas of commonality between these two sources, but there are also significant differences, and there are parts of Acts that we don't have corresponding letters, and there's letters that we don't have corresponding visits in Acts. And so it's really a big critical question in New Testament scholarship that I won't answer here, but will simply say that the question of his citizenship is related to the much broader question about the relationship between Acts and Paul's letters. Finally, I wanted to respond to a question that Bernard asked in, will the real Paul please stand up? And I think that Ashley also had a similar question, and particularly about what Paul says about himself in 1 Corinthians, about he sort of made himself into a variety of people in order to win some. Again, I think that this gets us to the question of Paul's consistency. And for the purposes of this class, I just want to lift up that it might be possible, it might be true, that maybe our desire to have a consistent Paul says more about us than it does about Paul. And so maybe we need to wrestle with that. Maybe we need to be open to the fact that Paul is far more responsive and is far more collaborative and is far more creative in working out the gospel and responding theologically to these communities than perhaps we would like or that would be convenient for us. I wanted to close just briefly with a few notes about this week's learning resources. The first is I've already posted the prompt for the discussion forum. So this is an even week, and we will have a more involved discussion forum. Your initial post is due by Wednesday. Your response to 2 colleagues is due by Thursday. And then you'll see on Friday, I'll post a follow-up question, which you will have the opportunity to respond to until Sunday. So it's much more involved, but it allows us to have more interaction with each other and with other members of the class. The second is, you'll notice the video lectures have already been posted. This will give us some thinking through what is local theology and what are some of our definitions of theology. So that's all I want to say for this Monday responsive lecture. I am glad to have connected with those of you that I connected with last week in the one-on-ones, and I'm looking forward to continuing to get to know you and learn with and alongside of you and from you in this course. Have a great day.